about the story of Nasreddin, this joke. François Rabelais, 1496, 1553, 1532, 1552. There is four books. Life, the life of Gargantua, the great Gargantua, the heroic Pantagruel. And what you have to know about Rabelais is that he used a fake name to write. It's Alcofribas Nassier. You can see it here. It's very funny because it's Arabic. It sounds Arabic, and Cervantes, for you know also. Si Ahmed Benengeli, which is also Arabic, but for the time it's totally shocking. It's like for the people of today, from the right wing, oh, Arabic and Muslim is dangerous. So Rabelais and Cervantes were having fun with that. They had the ecumenical view, but what Rabelais is doing is with Alcofribas Nassier. Nassier means that you put your nose everywhere, you intervene everywhere and speak. But at the same time, you have Pantagruel or Gargantua, who are the two big giants, history about giants, and François Rabelais. Alcofribas is an anagram of François Rabelais. So everything is confusing. Nobody's understanding. So people freak out without. So at the time, Rabelais was having a lot of fun with that because people were asking questions. That was the goal of his writing. So, and not to be indifferent to his writing. And they are giants. And Alcofribas work with Pantagruel as his doctor. Rabelais is a doctor in real life. Is at the service of Pantagruel. So you have a lot of paradoxes. So you have a lot of story around. There is no absolute fixed things in this paper, in this writing. The two first books of Rabelais are an attack against Sorbonne, and Sorbonne said these books are heretics. They destroy everything. It's not serious. And it's only the king who protects Rabelais. The king protects Rabelais, then he stopped to protect him, and then he protect him. So it was always, he was against attack during his life, because people persecute him because the Sorbonnard, what we call the Sorbonnard, academician from La Sorbonne, attack him a lot and try to forbid his books because he's trying to communicate the highest conception to change the world, to change France at the time, to the population, with the language of the population. That's the very scandal of Rabelais and why he was attacked. You have Grand-Gousier, the father of Gargantua and Grand-Gousier and Pantagruel. It's divine wine. They are looking for the divine bottle, which is the wine. You mean in church? In the church what we are doing. What we are doing in the church. What they are doing. They drink wine. It's the blood. Eat because it's my body, drink because it is my blood. But Rabelais said it's the real goal is the divine wine. What is that? Is mocking against religions, is insulting religion. But Rabelais is the highest form of Christianism in France. Give confidence to people, give art and science to the population. Because he writes his book with a scientific strategy. It's not a fixed academic way of writing. People like the story of giants. It's a language to communicate to the people the highest conception of the elite, because at the time, only the elite have the knowledge. Only the elite have the knowledge of the history, of the Greek culture, everything in the past. No, the people doesn't even know to read in France at the time. And so only the elite was able to give to their children, a form of knowledge about music, art, culture, and history, but to maintain the system, not to educate the people. And Rabelais decided to give back to the population art and science. That's why he is using Pantagruel, because it was well known in the popular culture, but with the highest conception, inventing a lot of words, transitive forms of language. You have the verb at the beginning, at the end. So to play with the verbs, the grammar at the time is manipulated, everything to play with the people. And Rabelais, we have to read it. People were reading Rabelais in group. People were 10, and so someone was reading Rabelais, and all the people in the village was listening. So it was kind of mass organizing by reading the paper of Rabelais. I want to read first, which the manifest about war and peace, which is the letter which Grangousier wrote to his son Gargantua. It's a very beautiful letter. There is a bad giant which named Picrocol, what we call Picrocol in war. Picrocol want to loot, to kill, to extermine everything that Grangousier has. He's a feudal guy. What we can do? And Grangousier said, I did everything to work with him, to be nice with him, but he doesn't want. So how? It's about war and peace. If we need a peace, and because Grangousier is very nice, so he accept to be loot, and he accept to be destroyed, to be exterminated, and give everything to Picrocol who wants war. Guerre et paix, war and peace. So he has the legitimacy to defend itself against the feudal system. He's like a musical composer when he's writing. He's playing with all the theme at the same time in the same sentence. So it's quite short, but in Rabelais you have the total opposition of the formalism in French. A language of military language, or like Boileau. The language of the king, say the words. Yeah. What we can conceive, we can say it easily because the words are coming very fast. So it's a way to say that we can say everything with every word. So it's Boileau, the language of the elite. But I will read you the letter. The letter of Grangousier wrote to his son Gargantua. In the Rabelais language at the time, it's not the French of today, but you will see the music, which is the Grangousier wrote to his son Gargantua. It's what we call the manifest of the Renaissance. The fervency of these studies did require that I should not in a long time. Oh, he wished. So he put his son to a philosophy class. Okay. I should not in a long time recall thee from that philosophical rest thou now enjoyest. if you stay here to do what you are doing, will not. Okay. If the confidence repose in our friend and ancient confederate, had not at this present disappointed. The assurance of my old age. But seeing such my fatal destiny, that I should be now disquiet by those in whom I trust the most, I am forced to call thee back to defend the people and goods, which by the right of nature belong unto thee. So it means an advice, you have to move, you have to act. My intention is not to provoke, but appease, not to assault, but to defend, not to conquer, but to preserve my faithful subjects and hereditary dominions, into which Picrochole is entered in an hostile manner, without any ground or cause, and from day to day pursues his furious enterprise with great height of insolence that is intolerable to freedom spirit. I have endeavored to moderate his tyrannical choler, offering him all that which I thought might give him satisfaction, and oftentimes I have sent lovingly unto him to understand wherein, by whom, and how he found himself to be wronged. But of him could I obtain no other answer but a mere defiance. And that in my lands he did pretend only to the right of a civil correspondency and a good behavior, whereby I knew that the eternal God has given him over to the disposure of his own free will and sensual appetites, which cannot choose to be wicked, if by divine grace it be not continually guided. Now, it's all French, but now we see the French of today. Therefore, my beloved son, as soon as thou canst, upon sight of this letter, repair either with all diligence to succor not me so much, which nevertheless by natural piety thou oughtest to do. The exploit shall be done with a little effusion of blood as may be, and if possible by means more expedient by policy and stratagem of war, we will save all the soul, and send them home merry unto their own houses. My dearest son, the peace of Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, be with you. Salute from Ponocrates, Gymnatas, and Eudemon. So it's the reason guiding him. I let you just hear a little bit. The exploit shall be done with a little effusion of blood as may be, and if possible by means more expedient, by policy and stratagems of war, we will save all the souls and send them home merry unto their own houses. Ponocrates, Gymnast, and Eudemon are the friends of Pantagruel. So this is the book, the story of Grand Gousier and Pantagruel, and Gargantua. It solves the paradoxes between war and peace. Peace is not to accept the enemy. If the enemy wants to destroy you, you have to have the capacity to face it, but with the less effusion of blood, and to offer him an exit for mutual development. And it's totally new because there was war all around the place. You know, so you have the knight at the time, the knight fighting each other, all the time in the kingdom of France. So we have to stop that. Now there is another book, The Force Live. because it's important about our own identity. Pantagruel is the son of Gargantua and the little child of Grand Gousier. They are going to expedition to find the wine, the divine bottle. With the wine, we can know the secret of the world. So this is the divine bottle. And Pantagruel, he said that maybe it's not known, but maybe we have to find out what is the nef. He is taking a nef, which is the reference to the Odyssey of Ulysse. Homer, nave. Also is the nave of Saint Peter in the church, of course, where the disciples of Saint Peter have to face the tempest in the world to educate the people about Jesus Christ and Christianity. And Rabelais showed there what is the nave of crazy people and how to preserve ourselves and the population to go in the right direction, which is the divine bottle. It's like a submarine today. Is a team building, as we say today. We have a mission. We are doing it together. You have Panurge. We will talk about Panurge later. Il y a Épistémon. We'll talk about epistemology, and they are all on the nave, going to find the divine bottle. I think that's what say Pope Francis. Peut-être it's shocking, but it creates something in you. It's create interest. It's develop your knowledge. And it's help to develop your acknowledgement. They are going to find the divine bottle. There is a lot of step in this story, but at some point they live in a world where what we call unfrozen words. It's a metaphor. They are listening noises. When we were at sea, junketing, tippling, discoursing, and telling stories, Pantagruel rose and stood up to look out, then asked us, "Do you hear nothing, gentlemen? Methink I hear some people talking in the air. Yes, I can see somebody, nobody. Hark. They are hearing voice in the air." Et il y a Panurge. Panurge is coming. Pani is the victim. From the Greek, Panurgos is directed by his sensual perception. He is very cruel. He's very nasty. He has no sense of the good, but when something happens, he's scared. Panurge cry out, saying, "Cod's belly, there is no fooling with the devil. We are Béchid, let's fly, let's fly. There are some embuscade hereabouts. Friar John, are you there, my love? We have to move, we have to move." This is Panurge. And Pantagruel succeed to understand the unfrozen words. He is not afraid of it. What is said? Pantagruel, hearing the sad outcry which Panurge made, say, "Who talks of flying?" And let's first see who they are. Perhaps they may be friends. And Pantagruel say, "Panurge, give me the words." And so we have to not you have to be silent because the unfrozen words and it say I also remember continue that Aristotle affirms Homer's words to be flying, moving, and consequently animated. Besides, Antiphanes said that Plato's philosophy was like words, which, being spoken in some country during a hard winter, are immediately congealed, frozen up, and not heard. From what Plato taught young lads could hardly be understood by them when they were grown old. And so then there is a tempest. And what is funny is that the head of the Sorbonne, uh, his name was Tempête, which means tempest, of course, and he was a very cruel guy, treating very badly the students, who was a traitor to the Christianism philosophy. So now when you have the tempête, Panurge is totally scared. Panurge prayed Pantagruel. I will fail. Oh, sorry. I will. Oh, sorry, I lost the. He said that happiness is to be not on the sea, not traveling, not on the nave, but be on the ground and not move and do nothing. I perceive some very sharp words and some bloody words, which I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared, boo boo, boo boo. So he's totally destroyed by fear of Panurge because he's victim of his sensual perception. He's paralyzed because there is something new that he cannot face, like the head of the Sorbonne. Pantagruel reacts, but Pantagruel will not let me saying that it is a folly that we are never like to want. So he take the leadership and cooperate with God to save everybody from the tempest. He is the only one who is able to not be scared about the situation. So, so everybody is working all together while Panurge is crying on his ass, screaming, and be scared by the situation. And he has not intervened. What Martin Luther King was quoted yesterday, if you don't intervene, maybe you will live until 90 years old, but you will die when you have to intervene and you do not. At this time, you are already dead. But Pantagruel said, no, we have to intervene. We have to face tempest. Panurge, I'm so scared. I want to be on the ground. I want to be on the ground. I want my feet, on the ground. So it's totally. I want to go back with my cows and my goats. Oh, I want to sleep well. I want to be in my bed. Hola, 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 zalas. He's thinking only about himself and to be safe, and all the team, all his friends, he forgets everybody. Oh my God. Boo. I don't want God to do this kind of thing to us. So he's trying to change God because as God is creating, bad things for him, so he won't say, "Oh no, no, please, I want to change of God," because God is not nice with him, so he want to change the God. So it's funny. Is a relation with God which is not a higher conception of God of creation, but is a God which can be utilized to save his own interests. So that was the crazy name. So now he's going in the sea and he's trying to he's almost dying and say, "I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying, boo, 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 boo." So everybody except him is trying to solve the problem. He's the only one crying and screaming and he doesn't care about the other, but he said, I'm dying, please help me. But he's not doing anything to help him and he's not doing anything to help the other. And he called the other. Panur say, please do something, help me. So this is the education of Rabelais to show how people, if they are not courageous, and the other are calling him, to join, to help, to save the boat from the tempest, but he's unable to react. He's only thinking about him. He's thinking he will die, and he's not. And Frère John, because there is other Demosthenes and Epistemon and other people, everybody is laughing at some point of Panurge. When the tempest is over, Pantagruel succeed to bring the boat to the coast. So there is a big fight. Son of a bitch, you should have. Sorry, son of a bitch, you should have react. And Pantagruel say, "Oh, do you have some news of your mother?" Please. And so now it's even funnier because as soon as Pantagruel succeed to bring the boat back to the coast and the tempest is over, lot of other boats we were on the coast came to say, "Oh, we will to save you. We are coming to save you," but the tempest is over. So it means that a lot of people can see the tempest, can see people in the tempest and have a lot of problems. They are waiting on the coast, but as soon as the tempest is over, they go quickly and say, "Oh, we are coming to save you." Okay, but it's no more useful to save us because the tempest is over. You should have come before. So it's funny uh, to have this Panurge as an individual who is totally scared and totally ridiculous when the crisis arrive, and all the population on the coast, seeing the tempest, but also not able to intervene to save the boats. So it's funny to see this uh, that as an individual or as a group, you can be not confident and to save your brother. And as you see, Rabelais is quoting all the time quoting Homer, all the great thinker of the Greek tradition, and so it's a it's a very educational for the population because they don't know anything at the time. I repeat, they don't know anything about Homer, about the Greek classics, about all this Plato and so on. They don't know anything. So in the middle of these old jokes that Rabelais is doing is giving the references to the population for them to say, oh, I don't know Plato, maybe I want to find out what it's about. So we discussed that this morning about the formal logic. Rabelais is the opposite of the formal logic. So if you read that, you will laugh and laugh and laugh. And we are not laughing enough. I'm sorry. We have to laugh more. Not to have fun of Panurge because he's stupid, but to educate people because so much things are funny, in a sense when you are seeing the situation today, and they see that they see today the migrants or the Muslims as the enemy, but it's the people who create this fear in the population who are ridiculous, and we have to make fun of them. It's very interesting. So how we can make a decision? Et vous avez Panurge. You have Panurge. Panurge. Jesus Christ say that there is a man and woman. God created a man and a woman to get married. But if I get married, I will be, how you say that? Sorry. Cuckold. I think it's cuckold when your wife or your husband is going with another woman or another man. So Panurge is unable to decide because if I am married, I will get cuckold. If I have not married, I'm not a good Christian because God created a man and woman to get married and have a child. So he's unable to decide. And there is a lot of fun around a chapter of his book when Panurge is thinking with himself about if he has to get married or not. So it's so funny because he's unable to decide at the end if he has to get married or not because he's unable to take any risk. Yeah, there is a presidential election because we need a voice in France to speak the truth, but it's very expensive. How we can decide? So it's very because about uncertainty, because we discussed that this morning, but it's a question for all the question we have today. How we can intervene to get out of this tempest. And we have to work. We have to be active. Work, work, and work. And like this, we can know if things are false or truth. This is the higher conception. But we cannot all the time. We are not God. We are not all humanity. So what Schiller said answer this question. There is moment, if we are fighting all the time, where we are in resonance with the universe and the universe, and by intervening in a political situation like today, to be able to do that, or when you have the tempest, to take the leadership and bring the boat to the coast. So, but we know that as a human being, we can have a sublime reaction to this event, to an event. And when we are this kind of moment once, we know it's experience to do it again. And that's what Rabelais is doing in France, to give people dignity. I had a debate with a rabbin in France. Oh, we have just to read the letters. Yeah. So we know everything was said in the past, so we have just to follow the roots. We have roots. Everything was written for us. So now we have to repeat the past. That's it. La Torah, le Talmud, everything is said. So some are saying that we have just to repeat it. But there is another tradition, of course, to not skip to the but roots is not what we call source, because source it's the beginning of something. It's not roots as a fixed axiom. And Rabelais is attacking the difference between roots and source because it's not the same. Because the source is developing to go until the sea. It's developing all the time. Roots is fixed in the ground. So there is kind of a debate around the difference between roots and source. So we have all the time to invent new things based of what we have. If the Evangel revived by Nicolas of Cusa, for example, and his followers, and Mrs. LaRouche today. But go back to this time. They were translating the Bible in French. It was only in Latin. It was forbidden to read it in French. So they translated the Bible to give it to France. And the time is over already. They are looking for the divine bottle. It's not the bottle in itself. It is the wine that they are looking for. Because wine is going, the blood, drink because it's my blood. But so for people to drink wine, and like this, you can be a Christian. But it's not drinking wine that give you it's not drinking wine who makes you a good Christian. It's everything which is all around the story of the bottle, the divine bottle. Schiller also used metaphor like this. Lessing also. There is no ideal state because we will become a tyrant. So we have to irrigate ideas, inspire people. The young people today has to be inspired, not indoctrinate. That's the message of Rabelais. The dialectic materialist say Rabelais is very bad. Dialectical materialism. But Rabelais is not that. It's not because he's talking to the population that is going down. It's exactly the opposite. Because it's speaking to the people, is changing the entire culture to a higher level. It's not adapting, it's uplifting. Je pense que c'est very important to have this in mind for the history of France, what I tell you today. I will conclude. It's very curious, and toujours having hope in a human being. Jean-Paul Sartre and went there to pee on the tomb of Chateaubriand. And Chateaubriand said something very extraordinary, in fact. In conclusion, Shakespeare is one of the 5 or 6 writers who have sufficed for the needs and nourishment of thought. These mother geniuses seem 5 or 6 writers who have sufficed for the needs and nourishment of thoughts. These mother geniuses seem to have given birth to all and nurses all the other. Everything is tinged with their colors. Their traces are imprinted everywhere. They invent words and names that enrich the general vocabulary of peoples. Their saying and expression become proverbs. Their fictional characters are transformed into real characters who have their heir and descendants. They open up horizons from which beams of light spring forth. They sow ideas, the seeds of 1,000 others. They provide imagination, subject, and style for all of art. Their work are inexhaustible minds or the very bowels of the human spirit. Invent, imagine for humanity that we have to act today. That's the message, to mobilize regarding everything that was said. And please laugh. love of everything which is not important. Merci. Thank you very much.
Oui, non, simplement pour que, vu que le sujet de cet après-midi, c'est de se poser des questions, d'essayer d'y
The
répondre,
subject of this
simplement
afternoon is to
faire en
ask
sorte de poser
questions.
des questions à chaque
We will
panel de ce panel.
have question at the end of each panel.
Donc, il y aura à chaque fois une question si on veut espérer
Une question
finir à l'heure
because
et sinon
we have to finish on
quelques
time,
bonus à la fin.
and if we
Si
have
vous
time
avez
at
une
the
question,
overtime,
Jacques,
we will
c'est
take more questions. But if we can have a
l'honneur est à
question
vous.
now, it's okay.
Et la réponse.
And we will have, if you ask a
Troisième
question,
question.
you will have a response, an answer.
Qui a pas levé la main?
Who has never laughed?
Bon, allez, c'est seulement parce que personne ne lève la main et qu'il faut rire.
It's
Selon
because
vous,
of
quel est le
nobody
comment
raise his
pour
hand.
récupérer
Oh, Jacques,
la
please.
souveraineté monétaire et par
Can
fidélité au
uh,
peuple?
can we have back our sovereignty, please, for the
C'est
people?
simple. C'est simple.
Simple.
En pensant que l'argent, disait toujours Larouche, est un idiot. La monnaie, c'est
Larousse
un
will
idiot.
always say that
Ça dépend ce qu'on
money
fait.
is an idiot. It
C'est comme
depends
le
on what we
crédit.
are doing
C'est
with
pas
it.
mauvais le crédit. Il y a beaucoup de gens
It's
qui
like
préfèrent l'argent parce que
credit.
c'est mauvais. Parce que.
Credit is
Ouh.
very bad.
Non,
Ooh.
le
We
crédit n'est
don't
pas
have this
mauvais.
money.
Ça doit
No, but
être
credit
quelque
has
chose
money.
qui s'investit.
It's something that
Et
has
ça,
to
au
be
moins, les nations.
invested
C'est pour ça que
for
les
the
BRICS
destiny
opèrent
of
en
the nation.
nations
That's why the
indépendantes.
BRICS
Mais
want to
ça
operate
doit
with
être
their
pour les
own national
infrastructures,
currency.
pour les plateformes
But for
d'investissement,
infrastructure,
parce que
for
c'est le
economic
futur.
platform, what we
Pas vous
discussed
donner
this
de l'argent
morning,
pour aller
for the
faire la
future,
fête,
not
et pas pour
to
le
give
donner
money to
l'argent pour
go
enrichir les plus riches, qui est quelque chose de
for
bien.
a party
Donc,
or
c'est pas
luxury.
la consommation. La consommation
It's
vient
not
de ce que
consumption.
tu es capable de produire. Et ça, c'est la
Consumption is a
consommation qu'on est
cause
capable
of,
de
is
produire.
a consequence
Alors,
of
Larouche
what we are
nous a exposé des
producing.
lois qui sont
Lino LaRouche
intéressantes.
proposed four laws, the four laws
Sur
of
le
Lino LaRouche that you
Glass-Steagall,
should
sur le secret
study.
bancaire, qui dit
Glass-Steagall
que
Act,
toutes
the
les
separation of the
investissements, toutes les
banks, splitting
spéculations,
of
toutes
the
les
bank.
spéculations sur le marché financier
So we
permis par
screw
les
up
crypto-monnaies
all the
et
financial
on fait
speculation and the
la
crypto money,
résonance avec
and
l'état
we
oriente
focus
la
only on a real
consommation
bank
en plan
of
programmé,
credit for
en plan indicatif.
a planification,
Vous le faites,
indicative
vous obtenez
planification as we had in France in the past,
d'ingénieurs, de savants.
with engineers,
Premier
creators,
point. Premier
thinkers.
pays qui fait ça aujourd'hui,
First point, who is doing that today?
la Chine.
La
Même
Chine.
les Canadiens connaissent une société d'ingénieurs. Et vous savez qui faisait ça hier?
Even the Canadians. And who was doing
La
that in the
France,
past? La
qui nous a
France.
dépouillés.
But we have
Oui,
been
le président
stolen.
Roosevelt,
We
c'est dépouillé.
stopped it. Or the United States of Franklin Delano Roosevelt too.
Simplement, il faut une
They were
banque
doing that. But if
internationale
we need a
qui
national
sera
banking, a
comme
national
cet
bank.
orchestre. Mais il y aura
It's like
des
a
violons, des
orchestra
trompettes,
chief with violin, cello,
il y aura tout ça dans l'orchestre. C'est-à-dire, sur le moment,
trumpets,
mais il y aura un chef d'orchestre.
everything. But you have a chief. You have a
Il
leader.
faudra faire une belle composition.
Then we need a good
Donner
composition
aux gens cette composition, pourquoi elle est
and
essentielle.
ask people to play this composition, explaining to them what is essential for to realize all the composition. Why the laser, the beam discover for space, not only to make bombs, but for going to space. All discoveries represent this potential, and it's very subjective, as we discussed this morning. It's not objective. It's not already written. That's why the thinking of Nicolas of Cusa is so important, because you explore the unknown with hope, because you know that something good will emerge from that. And someone said that at with his manner, Rabindranath Tagore, with an Indian poet. Xi Jinping used Tagore in one of his speech. His speech. He's not doing improving the population in itself. It's much more than that. It's the list is to listen, and China has a kind of democracy, which listening to the people. It exists. Nous, here, we don't have that. So they have something that we have not anymore. and Xi Jinping said, is to explore the unknown. That's the basis of what we say with Helga Tseplarouche and Lyndon LaRouche, with Nicolas of Cousin. I think that Helga Tseplarouche is much qualified than these people in the past. That's why I was saying when I said that we think bigger than thinking bigger than De Gaulle, and Helga is thinking bigger than Xi Jinping. But we should not say that to Xi Jinping, of course.
Y compris dans des lieux publics aujourd'hui. Et vous avez cette capacité, chacun d'entre vous, de faire.
And you have this capacity.
Vous avez ce potentiel, on a parlé de potentiel.
You have this potential. We were discussing potential this morning. You have to express it. And you will feel much better. Not only shaving every morning, but discuss with your best friends, your wife or your girlfriend. Examine this, all the debate that we have here during this conference. Men, women, migrants, all this fake debate, because you are thinking toward the future. My presidential program was called France with the Eyes of the Future. And Rabelais answered this question with laughing. Lyndon LaRouche was doing that too. And to conclude, it's better to have a bad joke, a very bad joke. It's better than no jokes. And that's why we are discussing today. Thank you. Rémi will explain more in detail what we can do. Now, Karel Vereycken about Rembrandt, la science de peindre l'invisible, which means Rembrandt, the science to paint the invisible. And without laughing, said Judge. Please, no joke. So he's asking for the lights, and then he will start his presentation soon.
Hello. The title of my presentation is The Science Painting the Invisible. So this seems to be impossible. I want this presentation to be a kind of workshop. So I would ask those who already know the answers to my questions not to jump in with the answers, but to allow others who are unfamiliar with the subject to speak and bring up their hypotheses. Today, in commercial contemporary art, the only science involved is to give up any form of rationality and to plop out any emotion which takes over the artist, which is often more downlifting than uplifting. But in well-composed works of art based on metaphorical paradoxes, there is a science of composition. It elevates ideas and emotions by a combination of invention and the skills of representation, which it must also master. Some few artists allowed us to enter backstage of their creative mind, and one of them was Edgar Allan Poe, who in 1846 explained the genesis of his famous poem, The Raven, and the philosophy of composition. And we are very lucky to have Rembrandt's painting, which is called Cornelis Anslo and his wife. a painting on canvas done in 1641. So this was done in 1641, and it's now in the Gemäldegalerie of Berlin. By examining the preparatory drawings and how they evolved during the creation process, we can in part read the footsteps of the creative process and lift a bit the curtain on Rembrandt's creative genius. On this tableau, you see the Mennonite preacher Cornelis Anslo sitting at a table, books on his right, and offering something that looks like words of consolation to a woman who's probably his wife. The composition is highly asymmetrical, which was quite unusual at that time. The low viewpoint from which the table with the books is seen determines to a great extent the effect that the whole painting makes. It is as if Anslo is delivering a sermon from a pulpit. The painting's quite large, 1.73 meters high and 2.7 meters large. The man with the black hat is Cornelis Anslo, 1592 to 1646, who was a rich ship owner and cloth merchant. He was born in Amsterdam as the fourth son of a Norwegian-born Dutch cloth merchant, Klaas Anslo. Anslo actually means from Oslo. So some claim that he's wearing a fur coat because the painting was executed in winter. But the fur here is really just a sign of wealth, success, and status. The brothers of Anslo were well known in Amsterdam's cloth industry. They made a lot of money by selling the sort of carpets that you can see on the table here. But Cornelis was also a deeply religious person for whom religion meant action rather than words alone. After his marriage, he created an almshouse for destitute old women. And he later became a preacher at the Groot Spijker, the church of the Waterlanders, who were the Mennonites of Amsterdam. So the Mennonites were a Dutch religious grouping originally founded by Simon Menno, a Catholic priest who then left the Catholic Church and added his own branch to the Protestant Reformation. You might know some of you might know the Amish people in the United States who are descendants of the Dutch and Flemish Mennonites. Menno lived from 1496 to 1561. So we can't really go into their history here, but they saw themselves as a gathering of Christians willing to live in the image of God. They didn't want an official church. No official church. They just got together, they read the Bible, and they tried to transform its message into concrete deeds. For example, the Mennonites took very seriously the scripture when it said that Jesus told people to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. As a result, the Mennonites decided they would never participate in war or go to war. So they were not really appreciated by the other religious faiths of the time, most of them involved in battles. Rembrandt, contrary to many of his acquaintances, was never a formal member of the Mennonites, but he clearly identified with some aspects of their peace-loving worldview. So let's look at how this painting was created. In 1641, Anslo went to Rembrandt and asked to have his portrait done. The preacher probably asked the painter to do a sketch to get an idea of how what the final portrait would look like. So here you see a first drawing with red chalk, which is now in the British Museum. So one question I would ask you is, what strikes you about this drawing? You see a paradox. What do you see here that doesn't really fit? You have one book in front of him and one book he's holding up with his hand. Now that's strange. Nobody, strange way to show things. And he's looking to the left. People are talking in the room, but I can't hear them through the headphones. There's also a little ink holder on the desk. But where's the pen? No, what someone said was incorrect. Somebody else is talking. That's not it either. In what hand is he holding the pen? For us, it's the right hand, but for him, it's the left hand. And the reason for that is very simple, because this was preparatory to a drawing. So he was doing a printed etching, which means you have to do a mirror image. And so appears as having a pen in his right hand, since the mirror image inverses the directionality. You have to plan that from the start. That's the way the etching works. So he did this etching before the main painting. The next one, you see here what's called a state, which is one step before the printing of the etching, and you see how he's holding the pen. So what's different now? It's more clear. Yes, it's true, because when he turned the image over, he pressed down on it. So it's a bit clearer, more precise to see. But what else has happened? When you do a photo school or an art school, you learn to do a huge drawing. And then my teacher comes and he says, oh no, this one is fine, but that is not, we want to take that out. So he comes along with his scissors and he does what's called cropping the image. So I'll show you here what it looks like if you've cropped this one. Formally, they say, oh, all the white part on the top of the first one that you see on the right is useless. But was this white so-called empty space really empty? And there's something here. What do you see on the white part behind him? The blank part, I should say. I can't, of course, hear what they're saying in the room. So we see that there's more light coming from the back, from the top. I won't keep you here too long guessing. No, 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 no. You're bluffed, he says to the audience. You don't want to see. Is there something or is there not? Yes, there is. Right here. There's a nail. There's a nail in the wall. Did you ever read the letters on the aesthetics education of a nail? The aesthetics of a nail. And here also there's something. It looks like a chair. And there's even the signature of Rembrandt on it. It's a painting which has been taken down. So the painting was taken down from the wall, from the where it was hanging on the nail, and it was put on the floor. And the image is turned toward the wall. So that's strange, isn't it? It's important you understand why. So you have the painting down on the floor with the image turned toward the wall. So to understand what's going on here, you have to understand a debate that was going on among the Mennonites. And what we know is that there were several, this etching was printed several times, which you can see. And on the bottom of it, what you see is a poem, a short poem, by Jos van der Vondel, the most important Dutch poet of the greatest poet of the Dutch language. And what we see is
Rembrandt maal Cornelis stem, het zichtbare deel is het minst van hem. Het onzichtbare.
He's reading it in Flemish now, so I'll let him go ahead. So I translate. On the what you can read here is, "Oh, Rembrandt, paint Cornelis' voice. The visible part is the least of him. The invisible we can only know through our ears. He who would like to see Anslo must hear him." So Vondel was the dean of the Waterlanders, this Mennonite grouping of Amsterdam, of which he was a leading preacher in 1641. So, in fact, the poem mentions a tekening, or a drawing, and the poem can be found on the back side of the initial sketch. So it is fair to think that Anslo showed Rembrandt's preparatory sketch to Vondel, the dean of his congregation, to see what he thought about it. So he reacted with his poem, Vondel, and he accomplishes three things. He says, first of all, he restates the so-called party line. That is the core belief of the Mennonites, namely that the word, and even more the voice, that is the spoken word, was superior to the image in order to evangelize humanity. Transforming others with your voice had a higher value than just learning. To learn, you have to teach. Secondly, Vondel gently makes it clear that his own art, poetry, is superior to that of Rembrandt's painting. And finally, he says, Vondel says that Rembrandt
Il est clair que
might
Rembrandt s'est
even do
senti
better.
interpellé par les remarques plutôt amicales
So
du
it's
poète.
clear that Rembrandt felt this was a challenge from the poet,
Puisqu'elle souligne
and the
l'importance de
etching
la
might be a
parole
first
dans
answer
cette
of the
idée de
painter, since it tries to state that point with the nail showing the image taken down and placed with its front side against the wall. But to prepare the painting, the big painting, Rembrandt did a new sketch, which is now in the Louvre, unless maybe some robbers have taken it out by now. Anyway, the iconography of the etching was certainly understood by the Mennonites, although it was insufficient for the larger public. Over time, he had to have more, add something to it. Something else had to be invented visually to restate on a higher level the same arguments and show this idea of painting the invisible. In the Louvre drawing, which you see on the left, Anslo's hand is moving to the left, or rather his head is moving to the right, leaning toward the person to which he is speaking. But in the drawing, if he is not yet speaking, he is not yet speaking, but he's at the point of speaking, just about to speak. That's a position of an unstable position of mid-motion change. I discussed with Lyndon LaRouche this idea of a mid-motion change, a kind of potential reversal of the movement that's going on. The speaking is totally manifest in the final painting, and Anslo's mouth is open and his eyebrows are raised as if he's surprised or interested. But going beyond the portrait of Anslo per se, Rembrandt invents something totally new. He shows somebody listening, and listening with extreme attention. So in order to paint the voice, that is sound, he paints another invisible phenomenon, this one being the opposite of sound, namely silence. He doesn't only paint the voice, he paints the silence of the person listening. And this way you see the presence of the voice, because a voice resonating with no one listening is as dead as the word in a book. With this, Rembrandt overcomes the Vondel paradox and states the superiority of his own visual art, painting, and the fact that through and by the image, the apparent opposites of sound and silence can be overcome and can make visible the word of God, acting through the voice of Anslo and the listening of his wife. Now, the heavenly light of God arrives in the room and extinguishes the earthly light of the candles to make place for the heavenly. So, to conclude, if you want to continue this type of discussion, I invite all of you to join the International Working Group on Art, which was set up by my friend Dr. Ned Roshinsky. And you'll see that in our international movement, there are many, many people who have a lot of talent, who have created works of a very high level. Debbie Sonnenblick, Ilya Ilko Dimov, Philip Ulanovsky, Christine Biel, etc. You'll see some of their works here. So if you contact me, you can get to see the pictures of all of these people, illustrations. Thank you very much. One question. How can we contact the discussion group? You didn't give any link. If you want to contact me, please, I am waiting for you.
Par rapport au tableau de Rembrandt, tu dis,
concerning the tableau of Rembrandt, about silence and the voice, is that his wife who's listening is also, she's also talking a little bit in the silence. Her mouth is open a little bit. And it's very interesting how because the way he painted it, you can see that she's really thinking things without, even if she's not speaking out loud, you can see that she's thinking. Yes. I don't have the time, but if you take the portraits of the different couples that Rembrandt has painted, by other painters, sometimes it's really, you see really horrible scenes, it's a little bit of debauchery or whatever. It's not religious. But with Rembrandt, you can see that a real dialogue is going on. It's not really religious, but it's people who are thinking about and discussing things that are beautiful, are important, are serious. And that's why it's so beautiful. Because you have really a sense of dignity, as Jacques mentioned before. I'm sorry, we have to go to the next person now. We'll ask Megan de Brood now from the Schiller Institute in the United States to intervene. Megan?
Music is not sound.
La musique n'est pas du son.
That may seem like a strange statement, but it's absolutely true.
Étrange, mais c'est
and it
absolument
gets
vrai.
to the heart of the fight between the oligarchical system and people like Lyndon LaRouche, who believe that human beings are not animals to be culled, herded, but there's something absolutely unique about the human individual, which places us above the animals and gives us a very special responsibility in the universe. Art, all forms of art, but music in a special way, has always been the battleground in the effort to keep the majority of humanity in a beast-like state, without access to the kinds of profound capabilities and self-conception that might lead a person to reject the rule of an oligarchy. Almost all of what passes for music today isn't music. It's sound, noise, terrible noise in some cases. All of it is suited for a population that has come to embrace its slavery. On the other hand, the profundity of classical music was central to Lyndon LaRouche's discovery in the science of physical economy in the 1940s and 50s, and throughout the rest of his life. It was an indispensable resource for Einstein in his work, and it accompanied, and maybe better said, drove the most fertile periods of scientific discovery in human history. So let's get into why fighting for a culture of beauty, which is not a matter of taste, why is that indispensable to our political mission today? First, the issue at the center of all of it, the nature of mankind. Every human child is born with the capacity for creative genius, to discover fundamentally new and true principles of our universe. Genius, then, is the most natural state of the human being. It is our species' fundamental characteristic. Along with that comes a fundamental goodness, which is a quality intertwined with scientific creative work. It's reflective of the goodness and the beauty of the universe. Now, if that's true, what does that mean for art? If we want to know what art is, what music is, as opposed to noise, we have to know what creativity is. So what ought we to mean by creativity? Novelty. Doing something that's so crazy that no one else could possibly have done it before, right? Getting high and saying or writing something that you never could have possibly thought of sober. Or maybe expressing yourself, whatever you're feeling at the moment. Is creativity really so arbitrary? Think of a person who is intensely creative in science. Johannes Kepler, Fermat, Marie Curie, Einstein, Planck, people who discovered true principles of our universe, the powers that are responsible for the physical working and development of our world. Those were completely new thoughts. They never could have come logically from, and in some cases were completely contrary to the current beliefs about the world. Now, we know that those principles that were discovered by those people are true and not just an opinion, because when we act on those concepts, when we build new technologies whose functionality is dictated by that thought, we gain new and improved powers to change the universe, to reorder it, to intervene in nature in a much more powerful way than before. And the universe thanks us. It confirms that we were right by allowing us to support more people living longer and better lives than before. So where do those new ideas come from? Take gravitation, a concept which did not exist for anyone prior to Johannes Kepler. Can you see it? Does it have a smell? What does it look like? What does gravitation itself look like? There aren't answers to those questions. Gravity has no sense perceptible existence. It has effects which can be described, but gravity has no existence to the animal part of us. Gravity never could have been derived from the logic of modeling appearances. So where did it come from? From the imagination of the scientist. A scientist who has been engaged in deep, rigorous work, sometime for years, wrestling with a problem, drives the current mode of thinking to its limits until it breaks down. He or she encounters an insurmountable paradox in the system. So where can they then turn? Only to a completely new idea, a completely new mode of thinking, a potential discovery. The scientist has no evidence for the existence of this principle except his or her conviction that, one way you might put it is, if he or she, if I were the creator, if I were God, that's what I would have done. This is the most reasonable way for it to be done. It's a feeling for the rightness and the beauty of the thought. And in some cases, when that new idea is tested, the universe obeys. It was true. The idea corresponds to reality. Now, what does that show about the coherence between the human mind and the physical universe? And so, while scientific work certainly requires the rigor and the exactness of various mathematical languages and systems and order, scientific discovery defies logic. It relies on the creative imagination and on a developed sense of the beautiful. That is the domain of art. Here is what Max Planck, who was not only a great scientist, but also a classical pianist, said on the subject. There is certainly a kinship between science and art, but at the same time, the differences are very marked. Science is the result of the desire for knowledge. The beauty of science arises from the fact that there exists a close connection between truth and beauty. This connection is probably due to the very structure of our minds. But the primary aim of the scientific man is not beauty, but knowledge. In this, he differs from the artist, whose primary concern is beauty. But in his search for beauty, the artist can also reveal to us truth and knowledge. Thus, science and art are akin. So here's a question. Can anything be art? Has anyone here ever heard of John Cage? Has anyone heard of John Cage's composition, 4 minutes and 33 seconds? Okay, I see some hands. Let me describe it to you. A pianist, or really any musician, or really any person, walks out on stage, opens the lid to the piano, or takes out an instrument, and sits there for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And then they close the piano and they walk off. All the while, everyone in the audience was trying not to cough. So, and then, next slide. Some people call this art. Does anyone know what this painting is called? No? This is by John Rauschenberg, or Berger. This is one of his white paintings. So this is white house paint on canvas. So Rauschenberg was a close friend of John Cage. So is this art? Now, on the one hand, you, and many people do, may try to claim that anything can be art. Who are you to judge? Not only is that false, but that idea, that claim has a very specific and rather unsavory source in the post-World War II world. We'll get to that. So what is art? If it's based on human creativity, what fits that standard? Here is what Friedrich Schiller, the poet of freedom, said about art and its purpose. Art has for its object not merely to afford a transient pleasure, to excite a momentary dream of freedom. Its aim is to make us absolutely free. And this it accomplishes by awakening, exercising, and perfecting in us a power to remove to an objective distance the sensible world, to transform it into the free product of our own intellect, and to exert dominion over it through ideas. Art must exercise that part of our mind and our soul which can make us free from the domination of the sensible world. Now, that doesn't mean a complete separation from the sensible world. It does not mean that you ought to retreat and look into your belly button to try to find some art. And in fact, Schiller insists, quote, for the very reason that true art requires somewhat of the objective and real, it is not satisfied with a show of truth. It rears its ideal edifice on truth itself, on the solid and deep foundations of nature. So the creative imagination must be allowed to play, and to play in such a way that the material of the world is regenerated as an object of our own thoughts, of our own free play. And by doing this, the audience member or the artist is uplifted toward the level of creative genius, out of the mere sensual, out of whatever state they might have been in when they sat down in the concert hall. If it doesn't do that, it's not art. Now, Lyndon LaRouche said something similar. He said, the creative element in music, the difference between a blank and a real musician, is that in real music, the passion, the beauty, the excitement is not located in chromatic sensual effects. That is romanticism. It is not located in the freedom of the interpreter, another word for liar. Certain gratifying effects, idiosyncrasies for which he is famous. The performer is properly enslaved to the music, not in any rigorous programmed sense, but in the sense that in great contrapuntal music, there is a progress of development, rigorous development. The excitement of music is the same excitement that you feel in a profound scientific discovery, or the excitement that a child experiences in solving a problem and re-experiencing discoveries made before. The passion of music is the experience of that light turning on in your head at the point you have made a discovery. It is an emotion which is precisely congruent with love, in the most profound sense of love. To love someone is to love them in precisely these terms of passion. The passion of discovery, the passion to create, to elevate by creativity, to communicate something which will become immortally useful. And therefore, what is the role of the artist? Can you have a degenerate person who creates worthwhile art? Schiller addresses that question in many places, including his letters on the aesthetic education of man, on Matheson's poems. And in those works, he said that the artist, before the artist dares to do something so important as to try to touch the soul of the audience, he or she must be sure of the effect. But how can you be certain of the subjective emotional effect you might elicit through a work of art? The only way to do this, Schiller says, is by addressing the species character, or that which is universally human in each person, the ideal person. The universal creative thinker in all of us is the objective. And so, Schiller says, before the artist composes or the performer performs, he or she must elevate themselves to the level of the ideal person, at least for the moment of the performance, in order to move the ideal in others. And that's the standard. Now, the highest level of achievement of this standard in the classical musical tradition runs from Bach through Brahms, and it includes a generation or two of performers and composers, well, performers and conductors after that, including some people who became great friends of Helga and Lyndon LaRouche, like the singer Gertruda Pitzinger and the violinist Norbert Breinin. Now, that isn't to say that you don't have important contributions in other places and other cultures, but the most advanced work to date was done by that legacy. And it's not coincidental that the people in that fight, in that current, Schiller, Mozart, Beethoven, the Schumanns, Verdi, were all ardent supporters of the American Revolution and the Republican movements. So, with that legacy, especially here in Europe, why is our culture so ugly? Why are suicides among young people rising at such an alarming rate? Why are people so debased, so drugged up, so stuck in their own limited pleasures? Let's look just for a moment at what was done to art. What was done to art to deny people, including all of us here today, or most of us here, access to art as Schiller and LaRouche discuss it, and instead to give us a so-called culture which keeps people in mental and emotional slavery. Now, one of the biggest assaults on classical culture in Europe, which was sponsored by the oligarchy, was in the period after the 1815 Treaty of Vienna. So we're not going to focus on that today. What I want to focus on, give you a sampling of, is the more recent phase which emerged after the end of World War II in the form of the Frankfurt School and the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which ushered in the counterculture of the 1960s, which we are living in the dregs of today. So the Congress for Cultural Freedom, excellent name, was a project of the American CIA. The facade was to promote an anti-fascist and democratic culture against that of our enemies, the godless communists. But if you look at who created and ran the CCF, who funded it and sponsored it, you see very quickly that the real intention was to make sure that nobody like Franklin Delano Roosevelt ever emerged again to be elected president or lead a nation, to pull the United States and Europe and the culture back into an effective serfdom. So how did they do this? By promoting modernist, irrational, sometimes psychotic, quote-unquote, art and artists, like the painter Jackson Pollock, like promoting Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which in its, I believe, second or maybe even premiere performance caused riots, promoting atonal compositions. So these kinds of things were promoted as the new mass culture, while at the same time, the classical current in music, and anyone defending it, was attacked as an authoritarian, as a fascist, and a fascist to be rooted out. Now this was done, for example, to the greatest conductor of the 20th century, Wilhelm Furtwängler. So let's let some of the figures of the CCF speak for themselves. One of the honorary chairmen was Lord Bertrand Russell, whom LaRouche called the most evil man of the 20th century for good reason. So here's Russell in 1951, which was the same year of the John Cage's 433. I think the subject, which will be of most importance politically, is mass psychology. Its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of these, the most influential is what is called education. Religion plays a part, though a diminishing one. The press, the cinema, and the radio play an increasing part. It may be hoped that in time, anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything if he can catch the patient young and is provided by the state with money and equipment. Theodor Adorno of the Frankfurt School and co-author of the book The Authoritarian Personality wrote an earlier work called The Philosophy of New Music. He says, and I want you, when I read this, I want you to think about what passes for music today. What radical music perceives is the untransfigured suffering of man. The seismographic registration of traumatic shock becomes, at the same time, the technical structural law of music. It forbids continuity and development. Musical language is polarized according to its extreme, toward gestures of shock resembling bodily convulsions on the one hand, and on the other, towards a crystalline standstill of a human being whom anxiety causes to freeze in her tracks. Modern music sees absolute oblivion as its goal. It is the surviving message of despair from the shipwrecked. It is not that schizophrenia is directly expressed therein, but the music imprints upon itself an attitude similar to that of the mentally ill. The individual brings about his own disintegration. He imagines the fulfillment of the promise through magic, but nonetheless within the realm of immediate actuality. Its concern is to dominate schizophrenic traits through the aesthetic consciousness. In so doing, it would hope to vindicate insanity as true health. Now, it was Adorno who advocated mass psychological means like the top 40 music charts, which are still with us today, and who joined degenerates like Aldous Huxley and others in Hollywood under the sponsorship of the Rockefeller Foundation to shape the mass entertainment scene, including the composing of movie scores with Stravinsky. Adorno advocated the use of repeated heavy beats in music to induce a loss of connection to one's body and a catatonic state. And he named universal necrophilia as the last perversity of style, as a good thing. So does any of this sound familiar when you think of today's popular music? Now let's return and come back to the earlier question, what is art? What is music? And why is this an indispensable issue for us today in this political movement? Why is culture such a battleground? So think back to what we've touched on, what I touched on in the earlier panel, what we touched on about scientific discovery. A discovery is not logical. It cannot be logically derived from the present, but it is lawful. Music is that. In human music, a process of development moves the mind through a discovery process. In a good performance, and it's worth saying that there are many bad performances of good compositions, but in a good performance, the mind is gripped. It's as if you're hearing your own thoughts. And the key is beauty. The emotion of discovery is love. And a society steeped in that concept of art, will not accept anything less than a new paradigm, won't accept anything less than a system of government and relations among nations that protect and promote what is human in all of us. So I challenge you to choose what side of the cultural battle you would like to be on.
Thanks a lot.
Hi. Can you tell me, please, what you think of course, we should strain to elevate the art so it could elevate us. But still, there will be some percent of population that would refuse it. For those people, do you think it would be useful to, because it would be too much for them to accept hard types of art that you're talking about, but could we, for them, at least put some, create the art similar to, close to their level, but instead of doing too much, just putting the grains, sorry. I don't know how to express myself, so I'm really sorry. Don't you think that we could possibly sorry. Je parle pas très bien français non plus.
So let me say a few things about that. One, I don't think we should underestimate our fellow citizens. Beautiful music taps into something in the soul, and it uplifts. You know, we have a chorus. S&P has a chorus. In the United States, Diane founded the Schiller Institute New York City Community Chorus, and we have had hundreds, maybe 1,000 or more people come through our chorus from all walks of life to come in and sing the most difficult, most profound music as part of their weekly life. And so one thing is, if you have, I mean, beautiful art, it's not something which is, you know, this intellectually complex thing. It speaks to the soul and activates the soul. Another thing to say about it, well, two more things to say about it. One is that in today's so-called classical music culture, you have some terrible things happening. The concert halls are full of terrible performances. It's very expensive. It's boring. And it's not really representative of what ought to be, which is where every household should have a piano and instruments and people's social time. And it used to be this way. People's social time was full of singing, social gatherings with singing and poetry. It was just part of daily life. It was accessible. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, also, composers, Brahms, Beethoven, many others, they found the folk music in many countries, different folk songs, and they set them as beautiful classical settings, set for the trained bel canto singing voice. Beethoven incorporated melodies from folk songs into his most developed piano sonatas. And then in the United States, we have the Negro spiritual, which are these songs which came out of the enslaved people, which were then through musicians and singers in the African-American community in the United States, working with Dvorak, the emissaries of Brahms, made classical settings of these songs. And so you take something which is part of the population, which isn't as quote-unquote elevated, and you elevate it. And you give this to people. And so I wouldn't be so worried about it.
Et j'en profite pour dire qu'on a une chorale à Clichy. Et pareil, on fait des trucs super difficiles, mais ouverts à tous.
Hello, as you maybe know, I'm a singer. I just wanted to add on this question of yours. Do you hear me better now? Yeah. Because I was recently in Argentina to sing Mozart arias in a very beautiful theater in Cordoba in Argentina. the most beautiful theater with the most fantastic acoustic one could imagine. And this academic orchestra that were accompanying me, they were young people from all sorts of, one could say, of maybe extremely complicated background. So for these young people, this academic orchestra was like, it gave them another direction of their lives. It changed their lives. So music, Megan, you talked about the uplifting. For them to have this discipline together and be counted as somebody extremely precious, somebody worthy, and somebody that, yeah. Somebody worthy and worthy of the most beautiful of God's creation. That young person that came maybe from a family of the deepest horrors possible had that possibility of become a worthy person that produces beauty. I taught lessons to some of them in singing, because some of them were interested in singing too. But I noticed that for them, this theater, the theater of Cordoba, actually let them, these pupils, to come regularly to the theater, so the theater became their home, second home. And that attitude we should have more of in Europe, also in the States, that to have a milieu that is public, that is paid by the taxpayers, where the young people of the orchestra can come there, meet, rehearse, do beautiful things together, but also between the rehearsals, that it becomes their refuge or their, I don't know how to explain it, but I know it's difficult to explain. But yeah, so it was a second home for them. And I remember this, one of the pupils had a music book or study book on the note stand, and it was written "Musica trasforma la vida," and that's exactly what it does. Music transforms your life forever, and it's scientific. It's not something mystical. It's scientific, but it's something that is lifting us up to something higher, something more beautiful. So music is part of the universe, and the classical music is that. So I just wanted to say this little anecdote about this incredible experience that I had in Argentina, and these young people, more part of them came from very poor backgrounds, and they were crying when I was singing, and so yeah, so it's really something more powerful than we could ever dream of, this message. Thank you.
Désolé, il faut qu'on continue, sinon on va pas pouvoir finir.
So sorry, but we have to continue, because if not, we will not be able to finish. There is many things to say again. Still, we're gonna have now Kanan, which come here from the Bronx. I don't know of what he will speak, but I think it will poetic. We will see. Let's see.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I plan to do something on Shakespeare today, and the title of my presentation is The tragedy of Rome, how popular opinion leads to dictatorship. We're living in quite historic circumstances, as you may know, where the world is flailing wildly from one trajectory to another, from that of emerging wars between nations, as we now see erupting in the Caribbean, and what may perhaps be another US-launched proxy war, and on the flip side of that, of peace between nations, and the potential put forth by nations in the global south, the Far East, to transcend geopolitics once and for all, and cooperate for the general welfare of all of mankind. That effort, of course, has been spearheaded by Helga Zepp-LaRouche since her call in 2022, right after the special military operation in Ukraine, for a new security and development architecture in which all nations' interests are taken into account. That fundamentally new conception of organizing governments all across the world is not something you can immediately see with your senses, but requires, and if we could show the quote, what President Vladimir Putin recently described in his speech at the Vondel Club as a philosophy of complexity. And he goes on to say, it's something akin to quantum mechanics, which is wiser and in some ways more complex than classical physics. In order to really see that vision as a reality, we must orient ourselves to the deep historic currents which underlie and drive the drama that we see unfolding today. And it is to that end, as Friedrich Schiller said, that we study history not as a series of events, but rather as the subject of man's relationship to the physical universe, and how man shapes that process of history through his actions. So I'll turn now to Shakespeare, who I've discussed before in a series of presentations in the past as not only a dramatist, but a historian. And he understood history much better than your average Ivy League professor today. You can get a sense of history from Shakespeare much better than a self-righteous fool from Harvard, and you don't have to pay thousands of dollars to do so, which makes it even better. So to start with, Shakespeare had written several plays on the kings of England, from the Plantagenet dynasty to the Tudors. The great Tudor king, Henry VII, had overthrown the tyranny of the Plantagenet dynasty with the defeat of Richard III at what was known as the famous Battle of Bosworth, which you see depicted there. The reign of Henry VII had many similar characteristics of Louis XI's reign of France, which I'm happy that we'll be hearing about that today later from Remy. And he had brought about really the first incarnation of the modern sovereign nation state in Europe. And following what Louis XI did, Henry VII had built an intellectual cadre of the world's most renowned thinkers in England, many of whom were steeped in the Platonic tradition respecting man, which regarded each person as a potential creative force for the good. Some of these people are not really well known today, but it's useful to introduce you to at least a couple of them. We had Thomas Linacre, and this is from the left to right, Thomas Linacre, John Colet, and William Grocyn. And their ideas had really influenced and extended into the European continent through the great figure of Erasmus, a universal genius who was pursuing reform in the church, as Nicholas of Cusa had done prior. And then his influence was extended back into England with the great statesman, Sir Thomas More, who I don't have a picture of, but who Shakespeare relied upon as a source for some of his great history plays, such as Richard III and Henry VIII. This academy that Henry VII built in England was steeped in the works of the ancient Greeks, but also a couple of Romans, one of whom was Cicero, the last, you could really say, great statesman of Rome before it eventually descended into an empire. I'll go a little backwards now and talk about Cicero in the context of Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, which is a brilliant portrayal of Rome's collapse after the assassination of Caesar and the following civil war that ensues, which leads to Caesar's son, Octavius, later became Augustus, becoming the emperor of Rome. Cicero was born in 106 BC, and he had lived as the so-called Roman Republic, which really wasn't a republic, was collapsing and degenerating into a completely lawless, futureless society. He had lived through the dictatorship of Sulla and the triumvirate, which consisted of Caesar and his ally Pompey from 49 to 44 BC. Cicero, unlike many of his Roman contemporaries, was committed to the idea that man was a being of reason and could uncover natural law through discovery of principles governing the universe. He was very well versed in Greek at a time when many of his contemporaries can only speak Latin. And I point this out not just as a historical anecdote, but it's a central point in Shakespeare's play, where one of the conspirators in the assassination plot of Caesar remarks to Cassius, one of the main conspirators in the play, that he cannot understand a speech given by Cicero, for, quote, it was Greek to him. Not only is his literal saying that he can't understand the language Cicero speaks, since he can't speak Greek, but it's a metaphor for the utter failure of Roman leadership up to that point, in understanding the principles of statecraft, which determines the lawfulness of a given society. Let's now listen to a scene from Julius Caesar. For context, your context, Brutus and Cassius, the leading conspirators in the play, have just had an intense discussion about the necessity of removing Caesar from power. Since they fear he will revoke the power of the Senate and declare himself the sole authority over Rome, Brutus, at this point, he's conflicted on whether he's going to kill Caesar to restore justice, but Cassius sways him, calling Caesar a lean and hungry man. And at another point, another conspirator, Casca, emerges from a scene where Caesar was offered a laurel, kind of like a crown, and he ended up fainting when presented with it. And they basically grab Casca and they just want to figure out what's going on. So why don't we play that now, and I'll have the dialogue up on screen.
Me by the cloak. Would you speak with me?
Hi, Casca. Tell us what has chanced today that Caesar looks so sad.
Why, you were with him, were you not?
I should not then ask Casca what had chanced.
Why, there was a crown offered him, and being offered him, he put it by with the back of his hand, thus. And then the people fell a-shouting.
What was the second noise for?
Why, for that too.
They shouted thrice. What was the last cry for?
Why, for that too.
Was the crown offered him thrice?
By Mary was. And he put it by thrice, every time gentler than other. And at every putting by, my honest neighbour shouted.
Who offered him the crown?
Why, Antony.
Tell us the manner of it, gentle Casca.
I can as well be hanged as tell the manner of it. It was mere foolery, I did not mark it. I saw Mark Antony offer him a crown. Yet it was not a crown neither, it was one of these coronets. And as I told you, he put it by once. But for all that, to my thinking, he would fain have had it. Then he offered it to him again, then he put it by again, but to my thinking he was very loath to lay his fingers off it. And then he offered it the third time. He put it the third time by, and still as he refused it, the rabblement hooted and clapped their chopped hands and threw up their sweaty nightcaps, and uttered such a deal of stinking breath because Caesar refused the crown that it had almost choked Caesar, for he swooned and fell down with it. And for my own part, I durst not laugh for fear of opening my lips and receiving the bad air.
What did Caesar swoon?
He fell down in the marketplace and foamed at mouth and was speechless.
It's very like he hath the falling sickness.
No, Caesar hath it not, but you and I and honest Casca, we have the falling sickness.
I know not what you mean by that, but I am sure Caesar fell down. If the tag-rag people did not trap him and hiss him, according as he pleased and displeased them, as they used to do the players in the theatre, I am no true man.
What said he when he came unto himself?
Before he fell down, when he perceived the common herd was glad he refused the crown, he plucked his doublet and offered them his throat to cut. And I have been a man of any occupation. If I would not have taken him at a word, I would have might go to hell among the rogues. And so he fell. When he came to himself again, he said if he had done or said anything amiss, he desired their worship to think it was his infirmity. 3 or 4 wenches where I stood cried, alas, good soul, and forgave him with all their hearts. But there's no heed to be taken of them. If Caesar had stabbed their mothers, they would have done no less.
And after that, he came thus sad away.
Aye.
Did Cicero say anything?
Aye. He spoke Greek.
To what effect?
Nay, I tell you that, I'll never look you in the face again. But those that understood him smiled at one another and shook their heads. For my own part, it was Greek to me. I could tell you more news, too. Marullus and Flavius, for pulling scarves off Caesar's images, are put to silence. Very well.
Okay. Now, I would ask you to consider this in light of the rest of the play. Eventually, the conspirators enact their plot to kill Caesar, and they're now faced with the dilemma of convincing this power-hungry demagogue, Mark Antony, who was one of Caesar's loyal comrades, that this was necessary and the right thing to do. Of course, they don't convince him. And later in the play, Mark Antony ends up riling the Roman masses, who are uneducated, they can't even read, and they're easily manipulable. And it ends up causing a civil war. And just to spoil the rest of the play, this ends with Brutus and Cassius dying, and another war between Mark Antony and Octavius, who later becomes Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Now, I just want to go to another scene, which is quite short, but illustrates the tragic flaw. Because right after Antony's speech, the Roman masses, they descend into this really violent stupor, and they confront a poet by the name of Cinna, who they actually confuse with one of the conspirators whose name is also Cinna. And they end up killing him. And Shakespeare, he's getting right to the core of this problem of mob rule, or what Lyndon LaRouche had termed populism, and he made several polemics against it in his various articles. But it's this idea that whatever the masses agree upon collectively, that should govern society, and we can't consider the truthfulness of the decision. So it's a short scene, but I think you'll get a kick out of it. Can't switch the slide. Louder? Thank you for... Oh, yeah, can you turn up the audio? Possible?
I dreamt tonight that I did feast with Caesar, and things unluckily charged my fantasy. I had no will to wander forth of doors, yet something needs me forth.
What is your name?
Whither are you going? Where do you dwell? Are you a married man or a bachelor? Answer every man directly.
Aye, and briefly.
Aye, and wisely. Aye, And truly you were best. What is my name? Whither am I going? Where do I dwell? Am I a married man or a bachelor? Then to answer every man directly and briefly, wisely and truly, wisely I say, I am a bachelor.
That's as much as to say they are fools that marry. You'll bear me a bang for that, I fear. Proceed directly.
Directly, I am going to Caesar's funeral.
As a friend or an enemy?
As a friend.
That matter is answered directly. For your dwelling, briefly.
Briefly, I dwell by the Capitol.
Your name, sir, truly?
Truly, my name is Sinner.
Tear him to pieces. He's a conspirator.
I am Sinner the poet. I am Sinner the poet.
Tear him for his bad verses. Tear him for his bad verses.
I am not Sinner the conspirator.
It is no matter. His name's Sinner. Pluck but his name out of his heart and turn him going. Tear him. Tear him! Come, Brands! Ho! Fire, Brands!
The Brutus! The Castiel! Burn all! And some the Castiel to the Gloria!
Away,
I mean, they know that it's not the Sinner they're looking for, but as they say, you know, bad poets have to die at some point, right? So let's go back to Cicero. Because Cicero understood very well this problem of popular opinion. At the age of 27, he went on an extended tour of Greece to study the works of the great Athenian thinkers. While he was there, he visited the priestess of Delphi to seek out a prophecy of his future. It might be the first time that the priest at Delphi told the truth, but he was told by this priestess, quote, "Let his guide in life not be popular opinion, but his own nature," end quote. And from then on, Cicero went on to become the most important orator in Rome. And he believed that his ability to communicate profound ideas in his speeches is the way in which individuals can shape history. Now, what you see on the screen is an account of Cicero written by the Greek historian Plutarch, and he had recounted what Cicero believed was the flaw of popular opinion. Quote, "Public opinion has the strange power of being able, as it were, to erase from a man's character the lines formed there by reason and study. By the force of habit and association, it, popular opinion, can impress the passions and the feelings of the mob on those who engage in politics, unless one is very much on one's guard and makes up one's mind that in dealing with what is outside oneself, one will be concerned only with the practical problems themselves and not with the passions that arise out of them." Now, that idea of not letting your passions or emotions get to you, I think this is what we have to deal with as organizers in what's obviously an intense and tumultuous situation. And we need to have the ability to rise above the spectrum of quote-unquote current events, what we think is happening in the world, and impart to people that we meet a sense of the future, which only, I believe, this organization is capable of transmitting. We cannot be like the mob of Rome, who strays from one opinion to the next. In the very beginning of the play, which I didn't show you, the Roman mob is adored with Caesar. They're laying flowers, they're welcoming him back after one of his triumphant military expeditions. Yet, as one of the Roman guards confronts them for, quite rightfully, they were not just before, just praising his ally, Pompey, who was recently killed. And now they've switched, you know. And, I mean, that's the problem. There's no sense of truth in this society. And back to the present problem. Well, people in both the US and Europe are raving about the problems they see in their governments, you should be quick to ask them what they pose as an alternative. And many will all of a sudden fall back on their feet and say it isn't within their power to change anything. They're more happy to be spectators, surveying the political situation, rather than actively doing anything to solve it. Thankfully, we have real solutions, ideas embodied in the work of Lyndon LaRouche, who had made many discoveries in several fields in art, economics, science, ran 8 presidential campaigns from 1976 to 2004, and it's our duty to carry out his legacy. As Cassius remarked to Brutus, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. That's the problem we have to confront today. That's the basis for understanding classical tragedy, as Shakespeare conveyed it to the population of England. We can't be underlings, but we must become historical individuals responsible for shaping society. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, again. I would like to make a question about the part of the play. The first one that you showed about the conspirators, Cassius and Brutus, making fun of Cicero when he was speaking on the Senate. And they mentioned that Cicero was speaking Greek. Of course, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I could understand from your presentation, that maybe the reason why Cicero was a good man with good intentions or a reasonable man was because he was a cosmopolitan, in the sense of being open-minded about different languages and cultures, while the perpetrators or the traitors of Rome, the conspirators, were more closed-minded because they were just like closed on their own culture. Speaking for today's current issues, do you think these dialectics plays a role, like maybe cosmopolitanism and we open our minds, not electing some geographical areas? For example, it's very common here in the West, people criticizing the Chinese, criticizing the Russians, but they don't even know what they're talking about, they just criticize. Yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts on that, about cosmopolitanism and open-mindedness.
Good question. Well, Helga always talks about the fact that we need a real dialogue of cultures, from China, from Africa, the best parts of Europe, and we really need to take the best out of these cultures to use it to enrich ourselves, I think. It expands our understanding of the universe, and it really does enrich the soul. So your point on cosmopolitanism, as you defined it, absolutely. I mean, just, you know, me being here in France and talking to everyone, it's really expanding everything. But on this problem in the play with the, you know, it was Greek to me, there's a huge difference between Roman culture and Greek culture. I mean, in Greece, the best thinkers, Plato, Aeschylus, Sophocles, they were concerned with the nature of man, of enriching man and improving our creativity. And if you look at the, you know, the Platonic dialogues, for example, the Meno dialogue, which I value a lot, it gets to this question of how do you discover truth. And also, they were very advanced scientifically. You know, the great Greek astronomer Eratosthenes had actually discovered the circumference of the world before we even circumnavigated the globe. So that tells you something of how advanced this culture was. But Rome, it completely collapsed within itself. It was an empire. It relied on expanding its territory and looting its populations through primitive accumulation and wars. And I think Shakespeare understands that, and that's what he's getting at with that scene. It's not merely the language barrier, I think, but the difference between the cultures.
Thank you.
Merci. Bonjour.
Donc, je m'appelle Rémi.
Hello, my name is Rémi Lebrun.
Et je voudrais saluer en particulier les gens qui nous suivent aux quatre coins du monde.
I'd like to greet all of those people throughout the world who are following us today.
Ok, pardon, excuse-moi. Je salue tout le monde à travers le monde. Et je vais donc essayer de vous montrer comment gouverner par l'invisible.
And I would like to show how we could
Par
govern
l'exemple
through
de
the
3 moments du règne
invisible.
de Louis XI,
And
roi de
I'll do so
France.
by looking at 3 moments in the reign of Louis XI, the King of France.
Donc vous voyez cet arbre.
Do you see this
Vous
tree?
voyez ça.
You see it?
Vous voyez peut-être aussi la forêt.
Maybe you see the forest as well.
Ouais.
I can't hear the
Change le slide. Je peux pas. Ah,
people who
voilà.
speak from the
Vous voyez
floor.
maintenant cet arbre. Il y a 3 enfants.
And
Maintenant, qu'est-ce que
now
vous
under
pouvez
the
voir?
tree you see 3 children.
Ce que vous pouvez voir, c'est qu'ils peuvent y grimper.
That you can see. So what do they see? They see how they can climb in it.
Y faire une cabane. C'est invisible, mais ça peut exister.
Hello?
Et en fait, ça existe déjà. Maintenant, non, voilà. Maintenant, vous voyez cet homme.
Okay. Okay.
La question, c'est qu'est-ce qu'il a dans sa tête?
Okay, excuse me, I was in the wrong channel. So if you look at this picture of the tree, what can you see now? The first one you saw only the tree, the second one you saw it with 3 children who were looking at it, and they thought about how they would be able to climb it or build a tree house. That was invisible, but it could exist. So in their mind, it existed. And now you see this man. What's he thinking about? And now you see the second picture, and what is he thinking about now? He's changed a little, but why? And if you have the answer to that question, you may understand why his hair has become white in the meantime. Where you see him here, or you saw him with Putin. This question of what you see in nature and what you see in people and what you do about it is politics. To locate Louis the 11th, he was born in 1423 to Charles VII. His father, whose throne was claimed by England. He was supported by the Burgundians. Joan of Arc, she was called Joan of Arc or Joan the Maiden. She was born in 1412, and she led Charles VII for his coronation in 1429, and she was burned at the stake later. Louis the 11th, at the age of 7, met Joan of Arc at the court of Bourges. That was in 1429. After the English left and the Burgundians rallied to him, they were distant cousins of the French crown. Louis XI observed his father's behavior, which was unworthy of his rank. He had a lavish court, His mistress, Agnès Sorel, was elevated to the rank of quasi-queen. He was complacent for the internal wars between lords, counts, dukes, and the church people. There was feudalism with rules of filiation, clan loyalty, blood hierarchy. And Louis XI despised his father's political weakness in relation to these rules, which he considered contrary to nature. So the first step-aside I want to tell you about began in 1447. Louis XI is 24 years old, and he was sent by Charles VII to the Dauphiné. It's a part which I show here on the map of France, toward the south. And he was sent there because he had flown into a rage against Agnès Sorel and pursued her with a sword, even to her bedroom. So this Dauphiné was the territory which was reserved for the son of the King of France, known as the Dauphin. But for the first time, it would actually be governed by him. So just like with the tree which I showed you before, look at the Dauphiné. You see the territory today with its towns, countryside, mountains, torrents, and the famous Rhone River, which runs along its western border. And it has wonderful wine, as some of you may have tested yesterday evening. But this is what the Dauphiné looked like when Louis XI arrived there. He convened the Estates General in Romans. It's the town where I was born, so I'm very interested in this personally. And the Estates General brought together the nobility, the church, and the third estate, which was everybody else, basically. Immediately afterwards, Louis traveled down the Rhone Valley to Valence and Montélimar to collect the grievances of the population and understand the feudal jurisdictions. 2 weeks later, he had an exchange with the Pope, and he gave the town of Montélimar another seigneur. He exempted the town from taxes and gave it the right to elect its own officers of justice. In addition, those who came to settle there would be exempt from taxes for 10 years. And a few hours later, he created 2 trade fairs and a court of appeal. He established a parliament in Grenoble, the capital of the Dauphiné. He simplified the administration. He created an official property register. And he also created the first royal postal service in Europe, operated by couriers who galloped across the territory and changed horses along the way to circulate all of the information from the Dauphin and his orders. And later that he would develop that system throughout the whole kingdom when he became king. So it should be noted that although Charles VII had begun fiscal reforms for tax on everyone, to create the national army and so on, the region remained largely subdivided into a myriad of tiny seigneuries where nobles and clergymen laid down the law and waged their wars, and they collected taxes at will. But Louis united the Dauphiné and used his power to promote its commercial and productive development. One political milestone was reached when he defeated the Bishop of Gap, who had attacked the French troops on their way to Italy, and he continued to levy taxes as he wanted. He personally used a lead mace so as not to shed Christian blood, and he refused to cooperate with investigations from the public commissioners. Louis seized all the money from the church in Gap and demanded 3,000 écus, the money at the time, from the city. The bishop fled to Rome, and the Pope agreed to let him return to Gap on condition that he submit to Louis in exchange for the seized money, and the fine would then be cancelled. To encourage agricultural projects in the province, he taxed wheat coming from France. He ennobled and financially supported enterprising merchants. Although the Jews had left after being subjected to high taxes, he decided to reduce the taxes imposed on them, and he rejected the complaint of the States General demanding their expulsion because they practice usury. He prohibited private wars waged by lords who raised their own armies, and he forced them to serve the Louis at their own expense. In 1452, Louis established the University of Valence, one of the first universities to be established in France. Theology, civil and religious law, medicine, and the liberal arts were all taught there. Nobles and lords wielded influence over Charles VII, but Louis now had the support of the farmers, the bourgeoisie, and the lower nobility. In addition, the advances in development made possible by the Dauphin were known throughout Europe, and young French people, seeing the opportunity to climb the social ladder through their own merit, flocked to the Dauphiné. 15 years later, when he became king, he brought Italian weavers, craftsmen, and bankers to Lyon and turned the Rhone Valley into a major silkworm-producing region. But then, following his marriage to the daughter of the Duke of Savoy, which his father did not approve of, and after significant disagreements with his father and his policies, Charles VII decided to raise an army against his own son. So Louis fled the Dauphiné in 1456, 9 years after his arrival, and took refuge at the court of Philip the Good, who was his father's sworn enemy. Now we arrive at the second episode, which was 5 years after Charles VII died. Louis had become Louis XI, the King of France, in 1461. And he intended to apply the policies that he had pursued in the Dauphiné region to France as a whole. But his father, and above all Yolande of Aragon, his maternal grandmother, were responsible for introducing a national tax system to counter the feudal lords. Louis XI increased it and was uncompromising with the lords. It was a complete mess at the time, with the different what they called the seigneuries, the ones that were ruled by different seigneurs. But the main lords were very complaining about the king's lack of recognition. He didn't dress as custom dictated. He was always hunting or traveling. He was always dressed as a hunter. The Duke of Brittany wanted Normandy. The son of the Duke of Burgundy, the future Charles the Bold, wanted Picardy. Others wanted to conquer Milan. The Duchy of Anjou wanted to take the crown of Sicily and Naples, which it claimed, but Louis XI refused to support it. Royal police and ruthless trials ensued, and messages between the lords were intercepted by royal agents. Finally, Charles, Louis XI's brother, complained that he had only been given the Duchess of Berry, which was unworthy of his status. So, faced with an uprising by the lords, including his brother, Louis, who had formed the League of Public Weal, as they called it, they concealed their personal ambitions behind the supposed defense of the nobility, the church, and the poor. Then, after 3 years of armed conflict with them, with Paris under siege for months, Louis XI opted for diplomacy and decided to divide the leagues. 2 of them were important enough to achieve this goal, the Duke of Brittany and the Duke of Charolais. son of the Duke of Burgundy. Louis XI knew that the Duke of Burgundy was too old to actually get involved in the affair. So, excuse me, I lost my place. The Bretons wanted Normandy, but Louis could not accept to abandon it because it was the richest region in France. So he focused all of his efforts on the Count of Charolais. And as soon as discussions began between them, rumors began to circulate and the poison began to creep into the League. Rouen, the capital of Normandy, defected and joined the League. Louis took note and, preferring to see the region conquered by force, said he was open to Normandy returning to the Duke of Berry, his brother, who was also very close to the Duke of Brittany. On the other hand, in addition to offering Picardy to the Count of Charolais, Louis XI proposed a marriage between him and his eldest daughter, who was 4 years older. Then, if Louis had no male heir, the crown would pass to the Count of Charolais. So, an agreement and a truce were concluded between Louis XI and the Duke of Brittany and the Count of Charolais, and Louis gave orders to resupply and the troops who were there in Brittany and Burgundy. And the siege of Paris was, where the population was starving, was lifted. So we had these agreements that were concluded for Picardy, Normandy, and the Charolais. So there was a pact, a non-aggression pact against some subsidies. The third episode was the arrival of the largest British army who came onto the European continent, into France. On July 4th, 1475, 6 years after the revolt of the Lords, Edward IV of England landed. And he was, as I said, he had the largest army ever used against France. A few years earlier, Charles the Bold, now the Duke of Burgundy, broke away from the Kingdom of France and allied himself with England. Brittany had always remained an ally of the English. However, through diplomacy and knowing the ambitions of Charles the Bold toward the Holy Roman Empire, Louis managed to lure the Burgundian troops into a quagmire in what was the east of France, which is now Germany, especially with the siege of the city of Neuss, which lasted a full year. You can see that on the map here. You see the English troops here. And so, Louis XI receives an English messenger bringing him a challenge, a solemn challenge from Edward IV. But at the time, Louis already had a great deal of information about the English court, thanks to his enormous intelligence service, which is why he earned the nickname the Universal Spider. But making sure that he was alone with the messenger, Louis explained the situation to him. The King of England was under pressure from the Duke of Burgundy and the English communes. The season for conquest was almost over, and the Burgundian troops were in poor shape. So Louis gave 300 écus, this money, and gained the trust of the messenger, who confessed that Edward IV was not very enthusiastic about leading this conquest for England. So the plan of Charles the Bold, who came back from Neuss, his plan was to go to Reims to be crowned there with to have Edward IV crowned there. So Louis XI ordered the destruction of all the defenseless villages and towns in the vicinity and the repatriation of all food supplies to Dieppe, so that the English troops were not able to carry out their conquest. Then, through a Frenchman who was taken prisoner by the English entered into discussions with France, and Louis sent a simple lord alone to the English camp to tell Edward IX that Louis XI wanted a prosperous peace between the two kingdoms, and that the Burgundians and Bretons were acting only in their own interests, without concern for those of the English. One thing was made clear: Louis would risk his life and his crown rather than cede an inch of his territory. So the English, faced with this, quickly offered money, an annual tribute, and a marriage alliance. All of his advisors believed it was a ruse. Louis XI did not. Charles the Bold heard about this and rushed over to insult Edward IV in English so that his court would understand, and swore to act only to restore England's rightful claim, the crown of France. And he wanted to make sure, this Charles the Bold who went over there, that the English king would basically become the king of France as his rightful due. So 1 month after the English arrived, the English proposal was made official, and in addition to money and tribute, the eldest daughter of Edward IV was married to the young Dauphin of France, or the marriage was promised. The next day, Louis ordered the city of Amiens to be opened entirely to English troops for a week, that large tables be set up and loaded with all the good meats that make one want to drink, and of all kinds, and the best wines. Louis even had his 12 most corpulent gentlemen sit there to get the ball rolling, so to speak. So on August 29th, Louis XI and Edward IV met on a wooden bridge built for the occasion, with a fence in the middle, where each one could just extend his arm over it. The English army remained on the riverbank, and after exchanging pleasantries, a few friendly words, the agreement was signed, and Louis XI asked his associates to leave them alone. The English did the same. So Louis XI and Edward IV secretly concluded a mutual defense pact in case of rebellion by their respective vassals. The peace was expensive for Louis in money terms, but he saved a lot of human lives. He thought, according to modern historians, that he had saved about the equivalent of 1 year of war. Louis XI was an exemplary king, was intelligent, wise, and he had a realistic outlook. He never surrounded himself with a court of flatterers and entertainers, but rather with proven and devoted advisors, and he always maintained direct contact with the people with no intermediaries. He knew how to divide those who declared themselves his enemies by playing on their baseness, but always in the service of a higher good. And this did not come out of nowhere. At his birth, as the third son of Charles VII, who was in conflict with England and Burgundy, Charles VII sent his son to the castle of Loches for his safety. so he would remain safe. And there he rubbed shoulders with the common people and learned to speak colloquial French. He was taught by Jean Majoris, you see here. And Jean Majoris was himself a pupil of Jean de Gerson, who was the protector of Joan of Arc. Louis XI learned Latin, history, geography, mathematics, religion. Jean de Gerson had written texts for the education of the princes of France, and here are a few quotes. Quote, the prince must be taught from an early age to love justice, to hate injustice, and to understand that his power is entrusted to him for the good of his subjects, not for his own profits. 2. The prince, guided by reason and faith, must correct abuses in the kingdom, both in the church and in the city, for the common good takes precedence over the privileges of the great. 3. God has conferred no rank of dignity except for the common good. So just recall here the response of Joan of Arc at her trial when she was asked if she respected the authority of the church. And she said, God is the first one served. Thus, from childhood, Louis learned mercy and humility, and he learned that kings and beggars are equal before God. At the age of 10, he joined his sister and mother at the Chateau d'Amboise, where his maternal grandmother was living. It's also there where Da Vinci later came. And this Yolande of Aragon played a very important role in establishing a France freed from feudalism and from she wanted to free France from Charles VI and give it to Louis XI. And it was also, she was also the one who enabled Joan of Arc to play such an important role. And she pushed Charles VII to create a standing army at the expense of the feudal lords. Louis XI said of her that she had the heart of a man in a woman's body. So Louis's childhood allowed him to discover the heart of the country, far from the pomp and intrigue of the royal court. And that's what made him hate feudalism. He never had a court. He never wore ceremonial dress. His goal was always to serve the greater good of the nation by traveling to every corner of the kingdom to find the men who constituted its wealth. Finally, in a France where about 5% of the population could read and write only, and 20% in the cities, Louis XI encouraged the arrival of printing in Paris and Lyon in the 1470s. And it is thanks to books that I have been able to bring you this story and the political philosophy of Louis XI from the past. Thank you.
Merci Rémi. S'il y a quelqu'un qui a une question. S'il n'y a pas de question, on enchaîne.
Does anyone have a question? Is there a question?
Donc je passe la parole à Johanna
Okay. Well, if not, let me ask Johanna to intervene now. She's going to talk to us about the Westphalian Treaty.
Ok. D'accord. Ok. Donc je me mets comme ça.
All right. I speak like this, and I will present to you. So, the Treaty of Westphalia. Helga Zeppler-Roche mentioned it yesterday, of course. But the question is how we make peace in Europe we stopped 150 years of religious wars in Europe. It's not a question of the past when you see what we see in the Middle East and all around the world, but if we look at in the university, what they are talking about, the Westphalian principle is the basis of the international rights, that it creates the sovereignty of the state, the nation state, but they will also, they talk about the Westphalian system, which is kind of an equilibrium between powers. And in the name of the Westphalian principle, they can say if a power is too big, we will create conflict around these powers to destroy his power and break the equilibrium between the different power. So we create wars on the basis of the Westphalian principle. So it's quite funny if we look at it now. If we look, it's totally wrong, totally weird. Of what is the Treaty of Westphalia, and to understand what it was, we have to understand the 30 Years' War, because the Treaty of Westphalia stopped these wars. Where I come from, in Franche-Comté region, eastern France, in the small villages, old people, there is an old expression that says, "Shut up, here's come the Swedes." Shut up, here's come the Swedes. Or we all say, as wicked as the Swedes. But why? Who are these much feared Swedes? That was the name given to the Germanic or Swedish mercenaries recruited by France, the French kingdom. At this time, this part was not in France. It was the property of the Habsburg. So it was the Swedish and Germanic mercenary recruited by the French kingdom in the war against the Holy Roman Empire during the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, the 30 Years' War. Donc, this war was one with Rémy. You see the wars against the British of the French kingdom, between the different monarchy. This war was one of the most atrocious ever seen on the continent at that time. We are speaking of that army of 100,000 people and wiping out 60% of the European population at the time. And what I say about the Franche-Comté, you know, the small region that you can see here. Here, I show you. And we have still some traces of this in Germany. We still have traces in culture about these wars still today. In literature, in the language, in the proverbs, in the mind, in the collective memory, until today. There was the death on the battlefield must be added to the massacre of civilians committed by the soldier, and also the indirect deaths caused by the epidemics of plague, typhus, dysentery that the army brought with them, as well as famine. And it was a mercenary army, private army. We have to pay them. There was a competition between the different mercenaries armies. So it requires a lot of finance So it creates famine, and the mercenary was burning houses, the ransacking of places of worship, torture, rape, and looting were practiced by both sides. The supposedly liberating army sometimes causing more devastation in allied country than the enemy soldier. So it's quite amazing. Because the army has to live, so they were looting all around the place, all the villages. And this unleashing of violence and barbarity against civilians was the result of the size of the army, gigantic for the time, and they had to survive. And they were creating terror everywhere. In 1618, much of Europe, including most of the state of Germany and what is now Eastern France, belonged to the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire considered itself the heir to the Roman Empire. It was a superstructure manipulated by an old feudal oligarchy presiding over the subjugation of a myriad of micro entities, duchies, kingdoms, free cities, decentralized and in constant conflict with one with another. To elect the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, it was the Habsburg family. The House of Habsburg was divided since the abdication of Charles V in 1558 between the Spanish and the Austrian branches that you can see in yellow, had secured its dominance over the Holy Roman Empire through a series of alliances, conquests, and the corruption of the imperial electors. It looks like what we see today with the superstructure above the states. And the Habsburg family, it was Catholic, and they were claiming to be the guarantor of the Catholic Church. So it has its own legitimacy because they were protecting the. But during the 16th century, Protestantism had made such inroad in the northern Germany that many princes of the Holy Roman Empire converted to it. Et donc, here you have, because since the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, which granted the freedom to choose the religion of their subjects between Catholicism and Lutheranism and the arrival of Calvinism, the arrival of a new emperor, Ferdinand II, in 1618, lit the fuse. You can see all his titles: Roman Empire, August, Germany, Hungary, Bohème, Dalmatie, blah, 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 everything. And this Habsburg prince was educated by the Jesuits, determined to dedicate his reign to the Catholic counter-reformation, and then become King of Bohemia, the cradle of Protestantism. And revolt soon broke out in this kingdom where Catholics represent only 10% of the population. He was elected king of Bohemia, like Czech Republic today. But it was the cradle of Protestantism, as I was saying. And Catholic was only 10%, as I said. We knew that it will be a bad situation. So the Bohemian nobles rejected Ferdinand's election to the throne and appointed a Calvinist German prince in his place. And the 30 Years' War had begun. In blue, the state Protestant. In pink, Catholics. You can see also Calvinist at some place. When the Bohemian nobles revolt against the election of Ferdinand, you can see they went to see the representative of Ferdinand, the emperor, in Prague, in the castle. It was so big, so they were sent out of the windows. But their life was safe because there was not it was not too high. But it was the beginning of the 30 Years' War. So this is the 30 Years' War. I will not go into all the details. The Habsburg, Ferdinand II, who succeeded to kept the Bohemian part of his kingdom and stop the revolt of the Bohemian nobles. But he will punish them. Very strong punishment. So other Protestant princes was alerted by that and allied themselves with the Lutheran Christian IV, King of Denmark, against Ferdinand and his ally. So some Protestant states with the Bohemian nobles allied with the Christian IV, King of Denmark, against Ferdinand and his ally. Christian IV. So, and the Habsburg will win, and the King of Denmark has to submit. It was then from the outside that the war was reignited. Gustavus Adolphus, the Lutheran king of Sweden, the Swedish kingdom, launched his big offensive against the Habsburg and Ferdinand II. And France will support him. Because at the time France has a king, a Catholic king, but France will support the princes and the kings who are Protestant against the Habsburg, which against the Catholics. Because France is surrounded by the Habsburg territory, and Richelieu, he was the foreign minister, we can say today, of the King of France, Louis XIII, and he knows that if the Habsburg win the war, France will have a lot of problems with them. So France, which was in the process of becoming a nation state, was surrounded by this Habsburg possession and expect to be attacked as soon as the Austrian Habsburg were no longer at war with the Protestant state and could then lend a hand to their cousin in Spain. The war had become a trap in which everyone was caught, even those who, like France, harbored no imperial ambition at the time. And France, as Remy explained, France at the time, and Jacques talked about that also, because France was becoming a nation state at the time and had no real intention to become a big Roman Empire to replace the Roman Empire. But war, it was a kind of a routine in a sense. It was a permanent trap. All the kingdom was trapped in this conflict and arrangement and treason. Thus, in 1635, France no longer contented itself with financing the Swedish war effort, but decided to enter the war directly against Spain and then inevitably against Emperor Ferdinand II. Gradually, the Franco-Swedish side gained the upper hand over Ferdinand II's side. But it will above all require the genius of Mazarin, in whom Richelieu had recognized all the quality of a strategic leader to succeed him, and the revolutionary paradigm shift he would introduce in the Treaty of Westphalia to escape this tragic trap. This is Cardinal Mazarin. So he's the foreign minister of the time with Richelieu. So he's in the continuity of the Richelieu policy. So he's very very good strategy, and really engaged for peace in the region. Alors, it's not easy, but he will succeed to resolve a lot of problems, and particularly the Habsburg of Spain, that everybody can be at the table for negotiation. So they succeed with pushing Spain to push the Habsburg in Germany to be at the negotiation. Here in Münster and Osnabrück, the peace negotiation began in 1644 between the representative of the Catholics based in Osnabrück and the representatives of the Protestant in Münster. During these 4 long years of negotiation, these 2 small towns will see a constant stream of diplomats from all over Europe, bringing with them their entourage, as well as geographers, lawyers, and mountain of documents intended to demonstrate the legitimacy of their claim. And finally, Ferdinand II will have to recognize the legitimacy of some prince in the empire. That the prince locally can choose his religion, even if he's living in the empire, the Catholic empire. We can have duches or comtés who can be Calvinists, Protestants. So the question is why it's commonly accepted that the Treaty of Westphalia laid the legal foundation for relation between sovereign nation states based on the principle of non-interference. And one can, however, understand the spirit by comparing them to the peace treaty signed the same year, 1648, between Spain and the Netherlands. In the first article of this, in the first article, sorry, of this treaty, the King of Spain, Habsburg, recognized that the States General of the Netherlands and the associated province and country are free and sovereign, and that neither he nor his successor will ever have any claim over them, and that he is concluding a perpetual peace with them. It's not the Treaty of Westphalia, it's a treaty of peace between the King of Spain and the Netherlands. The second article of this treaty proclaimed a, quote, good, firm, faithful, and inviolable peace, and that all act of hostility shall cease. And then Article 3, quote, each shall remain in possession of and effectively enjoy the countries, cities, towns, lands, and lordship which he presently holds and possesses, without being troubled or molested therein, directly or indirectly, in any way whatsoever. And this is very important. So this peace is, you stop hostilities. Peace appears here as a cessation of hostilities. The former enemy is left in peace. What, on the contrary, does the first article of the peace treaty between France and the Holy Roman Empire? I read it, quote, that there be a Christian, universal and perpetual peace and a true and sincere friendship between His Sacred Imperial Majesty, who is at the head of the empire, and His Most Christian Majesty, the King of France, as also between all and each of the allies and adherents of His said Imperial Majesty, and each of the allies of His said Most Christian Majesty, and that this peace and friendship be sincerely and seriously observed and cultivated, so that the parties promotes the utility, honor, and advantage of one another, and that thus on all sides the benefits of this peace and friendship may be seen to revive and flourish through the secure and reciprocal maintenance of a good and faithful neighborhood. End quote. So now it's different than stop war. It's created a friendship and a good neighborhood, as it said. The advantage of the others, of all the parties. The second article proclaims, quote, a perpetual oblivion and amnesty of all that has been done since the beginning of these troubles, so that everything that what might demand and claim from the other on this subject shall be buried in eternal oblivion. We don't have that in the first treaty, the one between Spain and the Netherlands, but in the Treaty of Westphalia, we don't have this part. In the Westphalian Treaty, we'll forgive the other. There is no vengeance. We look for justice and stop the vengeance cycle. And also, the treaty includes a true settlement of debt, breaking the vicious cycle of debt, war, plunder, debt, war, plunder, and so on and so forth. And we keep the good debt for protection, but not debt for wars. And then in the Article 3 of the Westphalian Treaty, prohibits each party from ever assisting the present or future enemy of the other, and all signatories of this treaty are obligated to defend and protect each and every one of the law or condition of this peace against anyone whatsoever, without distinction of religion. So you have to defend the right of the other. It's going very far. So your responsibility is to defend the right of the other. and it's, defending the right of others become a responsibility for everyone, and the state of the empire are prohibited from pursuing their right by force and by arms. These rights being collectively defined by the territorial restitution detailed in the treaty. It's not what's going on in the battlefield, of course, but all the documents, all the diplomats, the diplomacy, most in Münster and Osnabrück, to have legitimacy. And it is all these documents which can conclude by who owns this territory. I cannot go too long because it's a time, but it's just a small part of this part of history. And it's more important today than ever to rediscover as its source this piece of Westphalia that allowed Europeans to turn the bloody page of the wars of religion. And whatever you do, whatever we do, what kind of interpretation, reductive interpretation of the Westphalian principle, which is totally biased by the geopolitician of today. Thank you very much. We cannot hear. Sorry, but we cannot hear what Remy is saying. Oh, yes, now the mic is on. So we have to start the concert in 15 minutes. So, Carolina, just one question. Please, quickly, please. It is in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, so please give me a second.
A question on the works of Schiller and Shakespeare. Schiller spoke of the 30 Years' War. I believe the ones who write the ancestral letters. Schiller takes it up with Joan of Arc and also Wallenstein, and Shakespeare also with his idea of the British invasion of France. So how to find not a correct version, but how can we understand their respective perspectives when Shakespeare sees this as an invasion of the British, and I mean Schiller, and how can we, given the respective points of view of the works of these two playwrights, where do we place this conflict in history?
In English. No, I think the question of Carolina and the idea is.
If you can make a short
yeah. Oh, okay, but I wanted to explain what. Okay, the question is how do we convey? You understand the question, but just for the people, because some of the people didn't understand it, I think, because it was in Spanish. So it's just yeah. I'm just how do you say resume? But how do we stand by the fact that you have different historians who are conveying this history for peace from their standpoint? You can have different interpretation, something like that. And Schiller, for instance, the standpoint of the French history. Well, I won't go too deeply on the question, but the idea is to give Helga the floor to answer the question and also give some thoughts about what has been said and what she wants to give us. So.
Well, on this question of the different interpretation, this is very interesting because let's say the oligarchical faction in history writing, they always say that Wallenstein was an evil person who stole the power from the Habsburg and he was the criminal. But Schiller wrote a book called The 30 Years' War. And for those people who want to study Schiller, I can only say that he was not only a fantastic poet, but he was also a visionary historian, among many other things. And he had a completely different interpretation by basically denouncing the fact in the history of the 30th-year war, which was the basis for his writing the drama Wallenstein. So he had done extensive historic research before he wrote that. He came to the conclusion that all the official history writing were based on sources coming from the Habsburg and therefore had to be dismissed. And therefore he had a different conception, but he did not have other sources. But what he did in the Wallenstein drama, he invented historical figures who were not there, namely Max Piccolomini, the son of the older Piccolomini, and Thekla, his daughter, Wallenstein's daughter. And in the play, he makes them what he called the children of the house. These are the people who have a beautiful soul, and he puts in the dialogue in their mouths the ideals of the Peace of Westphalia. This is fantastic. This is so he, in a certain sense, did not go by the then available historical sources, but he envisioned the Peace of Westphalia by making this the play. Now, historians, about several hundred years later, 200 years later or so, came to the conclusion that Schiller, without having the correct historical sources, came to the correct interpretation of history simply by thinking it through, by exhausting the subject. This is if you want to study what a good historian should do, then you should compare the history of the 30 Years' War with the actual play of Wallenstein, because there you can see a methodology, because it's not, facts can be falsified, and as we discussed yesterday, in the age of digitalization and AI, you can't go by so-called facts because they can be completely turned upside down. But this example of Schiller, really hypothesizing something and putting it in the play, corrected the falsified historical, and historians afterwards said Schiller was the correct interpretation. So this is fantastic. If you want to study, and Schiller in the Universal History, why we should study Universal History, also gave a method of how you approach this. He says you do not, when you study history, you do not go by the chronology starting from the first, most furthest backward event, working your way up to the present. No, because history is such that you never have all the sources. There have been wars, fires, sources have been destroyed. So you never know if what you have, this was obviously before the age of digitalization, but even there it applies. So Schiller said, do not go from the first earliest recorded history to the present, do it the other way around. Look which forces are working in the present, and then from there you, in a certain sense, recreate what had to be the fight of ideas at the time. which is a very important difference in terms of, because when you're in school, you learn history, 333, Issuskeilerei. That it's a rhyme, and it says in 333 before Christ, there was the Battle of Issus. So you learn that 333, Issuskeilerei, but when you ask the pupil, what was this? They say, oh, I don't know, it was 333, Issuskeilerei. So and the real history is naturally the fight of ideas, and if you want to study as a historian, go to Schiller, because he, in my view, is the best from the standpoint of the historical method. Now, otherwise, I regret that we don't have more time for discussion, because so many fantastic ideas were represented today, which I think require much more back and forth and clarification. Now, since I'm told I have only 1 minute left. No? Okay. The Inquisition is mild today. I can only summarize my impression, or I want to tell you, that the reason why we are doing all of this art and, culture and music and so forth is because, obviously, if you look at the world today, you have some cultures which are moving upward, who are in a very different mindset than the Europeans and the Americans. If you go to China, for example, people are optimistic. They are building, the Asians, all of them are proud and have revived their traditions, combining it with a positive idea of the future. So if you look at the West, we are collapsing right now. I mean, and that is largely a moral and a moral and aesthetic collapsing. So when the Schiller Institute was created, from the very beginning, we had the idea, which Jacques referred to yesterday, that Schiller's reflection on the collapse of the French Revolution was that a great moment had found a little people, that the historic chance was there, objectively, but subjectively, people did not have it in themselves. So they could not catch the moment. And then Schiller said, from now on, every ennoblement can only come through the improvement of the individual. And I believe that that is one of my most fundamental beliefs, that, if you try to get different democratic majorities, forget it. It always ends up with the same, generally downward trend. And that is why the aesthetic education is the most important reason why I'm in politics, frankly. Because if we don't make better people, we will not get out of this mess. And, it is quite amazing that in China, for example, the question of aesthetic education is built in the state structure. Everything China is doing is devoted to the ennoblement of its citizens. This would be a whole other topic, which I don't have time now for. So what we have to do, therefore, is we have to, go back, and I can only advise you, read Schiller. Schiller, apart from, Darouche and Cusa and Plato and some, but Schiller is one of the most important, because, he came to the conclusion that in his time, people were already barbaric. He said, how comes that we are still barbarians? And he said, we have to, the most important task of our time, meaning his time, is to develop the Empfindungsvermögen. Now, the Empfindungsvermögen, I have never found a good English translation, because if you just say compassion or empathy, it does not quite capture it, because what Schiller meant with Empfindungsvermögen is that you have to be able to educate your soul and your mind in such a way that you are all encompassing, able to absorb the world and feel compassion with the whole world, which means everything. It doesn't mean just pity. or empathy with people who are suffering. It also means, to be able to always, take in whatever is happening in the world in your heart and your mind. It's still not capturing it entirely, but it's larger than the word empathy. And, if Schiller would be alive today, if you look at the period of Schiller, this was the late 18th, beginning of 19th century, you can say that people were barbarian, but there were angels compared to today. This was the classical period where, what Megan was saying, that it was quite natural for people to play an instrument at home. The house music was a common phenomena. You had a whole system of people playing at home, piano, learning, singing, and then it had a structure where up to the National Symphony, the best would eventually end up there. It was a completely different approach. And if you compare that today, how many people even know about classical music? It's in the young generation, people, if you say classical music, they say, yeah, the Stones, or the Beatles, and I think that therefore, this question of aesthetic education is really, because, somebody said before, I think it was you, somebody, you should leave, lower it down a little bit so that, people who are not quite on the level can also listen to this. You said something like that. Now that is, I want to shortly address, this is like, I want to be a good person, but I want to keep a corner of myself where I leave the little swine dog running around whenever I feel like it. Swine dog also is not English. It's a German word, Schweinehund, but it means your little sow. You can let it out for once in a while. But that is not what Schiller meant, because the beautiful soul, which is why I choose Schiller. This was a notion I fortunately got from one of my teachers at school. And I cherished this idea that every human being had to become a beautiful soul. It was one of the sacred ideas of my whole childhood or pupil, teenage time. And, what Schiller meant by a beautiful soul is a person who, with the method of aesthetic education, can educate his or her emotions up to the level of reason, so that you blindly can follow your emotions and they will never lead you in a direction which is in contradiction to reason. And I think this is eminently possible. It doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes and you're perfect on the spot. But you can look at your mind and your soul and identify in a self-conscious way what are the obstacles which prevent you from achieving that which is your fullest potential. And you will find exactly these little corners, which these little habits, these little cherished sins, you don't want to give up, like going to the fridge at midnight, stuffing your face, and things like that. These are the not so bad problems. I'm only picking them to make it easier for you to think about it. But it is exactly this cleaning out your computer, so to speak. From how do you call it? From viruses and Trojan horses and so forth, which makes you. If you want to become a fully developed human being, you have to have a plan. It's not that it goes natural. But you have to have, at various stages of your life, you have to make a pause, look into the mirror, and say, what have I done with the talents I have? Have I developed those talents to the maximum, or have I given away some of the potential I have for mediocre joys or for minor rewards? And you can always correct it. It's your life. You have only one life. and you can make that either a contribution to mankind progressing, so that you are in tune with the laws of the universe, what Megan was developing, because there is a way of, in the Catholic Church, they call it Vorsehung. No. What I mean is, when you are chosen by God, in a fundamentalist way, you would say, no, it's still not the right word. In any case, and you can say this is a religious fundamentalist wrong belief, but you can also, when you in the history of your life and history in general, when you do something outstanding, like Jeanne d'Arc, I mean, if you look at the play of Schiller, Providence, yes, thank you very much. Providence, so I always thought that the Jeanne d'Arc play was incredibly insightful. Please read it. Because in the beginning, Jeanne d'Arc, who is just a shepherd girl of 18 years or 16 years or something like that, and she gets the call to take up arms and save the French kingdom and the French king. So the first monologue she gives is a beautiful accepting of that divine task. Then there is another monologue after she fell in love for a short period of time with Lionel, the commander of the British troops. She does not, act it out, but she just feels a human love which goes against the call she had. And then her monologue is, oh, I lost all my powers and so forth. And then, then she gets into prison ship, and then when finally the battlefield calls her again, and she detonates her chains and goes and brings victory to the French battle, she has another monologue, and there she is sublime. And I always thought that these three monologues are a metaphor, not just for the Battle of Jeanne d'Arc, but for the struggle of a creative individual, what steps you have to go through. You first take the vocation, then you get into trouble, then you battle it through, and you arrive at the next higher level, and then you are in tune with the laws of the universe. And I think that is called providence. Because providence, in my view, is not some religious, mysterious idea, but it is, it is then when the human being does what is necessary. And that is freedom, And Schiller defined the beautiful soul as freedom in necessity and passion and duty being one. Unlike the Kantian moralist who has the categorical imperative and says, you must be moral or else, Schiller says this is only for the slaves. This is not for us, the beautiful souls, because the beautiful soul does what is necessary with passion and with joy. And you can educate your emotions up to that level. It's up to you. That's why we can't have this little piglet running around preventing you from doing that. So, and I want to just end with one thing, answering the gentleman on the cosmopolitan question. I mean, look, we will have more such conferences, and I invite all of you to help us to put universal history together more perfect than we can do it with one session of a conference, because we want the Africans to discuss the Timbuktu classical period. We want Ethiopians to proudly report that the origin of the whole human race very, very likely was in Ethiopia. I had recently a discussion with an Ethiopian ambassador, and he proudly said that there are new historical findings, which establish very clearly that all of mankind came from Ethiopia. you know. But in any case, these are important. Likewise, you know, I think that there are many contributions, so which we have to all bring in a dialogue of cultures and then resonate, you know, because isn't it beautiful that the universe is made up of so many cultures? How boring it would be if all would be one. You know, whenever I have traveled in my life, you know, and I discovered, let's say, India or Thailand or Malaysia or Brazil for that matter, you know, I'm happy because I discovered the beauty of the richness of mankind. So, you know, that's why the call of the Schiller Institute and of every week's International Peace Coalition meeting is World Citizens of the World Unite. And that's what we should do.